Good morning, comic book fans. Welcome back to Comics in 5 Minutes. I'm your ever-loving host, Shorty, and a little bit tiny, wee little delay today. One thing's about running a comic book store, doing the videos here, I have to wait until people leave, and weirdly, I like people in my comic book store. It's good for business. But we're here now, and we're going to review He Who Fights with Monsters, a story of Nazi occupation of Germany, the aftermath, and what actually happened at the time of it. And it is worth pointing out that, kind of to make a little bit more sense of this story, it is worth remembering the historical fact that the first country the Nazis invaded was in fact Germany. Not all Germans were Nazis, and it's weirdly racist to think that, and certainly racist to say it. So bear that in mind as we carry on. It might not come up like too much in this particular review, but if you're going to read the comic book, it is definitely worth bearing in mind. The comic book, by the way, is art by Werther Dell'Edera, which I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. I'm not sure where the emphasis would, the stress would go on that last word. But it's the artist of Something's Killing the Children. And the first thing that needs to be kind of addressed with it is how different it actually is from the art for Something's Killing the Children. And I mean that mostly in a layout situation, because the artwork, it's the same artist, and he does very, very good art with excellent use of shadows, slightly more subtle colouring. For the most part, we are talking much darker and simpler things. Every once in a while, to highlight violence, though, you do get a pop-out. And what you probably notice from very quickly seeing those pages there is we have a much more traditional layout as well. For the most part, you're looking at a variation on a 6-page grid, basically 3 rows of 2. And they will occasionally widen them out or box them out a little bit bigger. But it doesn't have the really interesting double-page layouts that Something's Killing the Children has. But that's a very different book doing very different things. And if you had relied on the same thing, I'd have been kind of weirded out by it, because this story is not big and fast and complicated. It's actually pretty slow and intricate, and it allows you to absorb the story in a much different way. And the artwork really helps with that one. You have the scenes of just somebody standing in a doorway with a lantern, and the beds in a cavernous underground area laid out in front of them. And it's a big enough panel on the page, that you feel yourself taking the time to really admire the intricacies of the artwork. And that is way more what this is about. It is still, to a certain degree, a horror story, but done in a very, very different way. The story itself, by Francesco Ottoboni, starts with the end of the Nazi occupation, and some people effectively painting swastikas on the back of German citizens and demanding they leave or go back to Berlin and get the burned out wreck of the city that it is. And they're stopped by a Russian who basically tells them that they're nobody's enemy. And that is kind of the point, as I was saying earlier. Just because they're German doesn't mean they're Nazis. It also leans into the title of the story, He Who Fights with Monsters. For people who don't know, it's a shortened version of a Nietzsche quote, which they, thankfully, because I didn't have to look up for it, they put at the beginning here. He who fights with monsters might take care lest he thereby become a monster. An interesting concept, and one worth discussing, probably in larger details or a larger scope later on. I'm not a massive fan of Nietzsche. I've not read that much by them, but I have read. He comes across as somebody who's maybe not my kind of guy. But that is quite a popular quote of his, and it's one that I think is worthy of investigation. However, in this comic book with Nazis in, one would safely assume that the monster he will be fighting is a Nazi or Nazism in general. And the implication thereby would be, well, be careful about, going after those Nazis, otherwise you might become bad. That is a very right-wing way of looking at things. It's like, oh, aren't the people who punch fascists the real fascists? It's like, no, actually, Nazism and fascism is a very specific thing. It means more than just being bad. It means more than doing stuff that people disagree with. It means more than just being on the opposite side of an argument, somebody who thinks they're right. It's something that I will not have time to discuss in the rest of this video, but suffice to say that if somebody thinks Nazi things, says Nazi things, does Nazi things, shares Nazi memes, makes Nazi jokes, laughs at other people's Nazi jokes, chances are they're a Nazi, and I've got to be honest, I've no problem with if you punch somebody for doing that. Totally okay with that one, and I would not think, well, you're just as bad as the Nazi. We're coming to the whole paradox of tolerance, which again is a really big idea, which is worth getting into. And I think framing all of that and actual Nazism and the idea of a Jewish golem which will be raised from underground synagogue to fight against the Nazis is an unusual way to frame the story between what would be a monster and would it be bad to fight that monster. Now, I kind of trust the writer on this one because he's done such a good job of laying out the story as it happens, with the artist doing the pacing, and the temperament of the entire thing is brilliant. So I'd like to think there is going to be more to it, and it's not just going to be kind of reductionist to be careful, fighting literally evil might make you a little bit bad too, instead of what they kind of do at the beginning there, which is showing that you can't use the excuse of fighting evil to fight innocent people. I'm hoping that's going to be more the point of it. One last thing, there is a little bit of a story within a story thing, which is a literary device I'm not a massive fan of, but it works quite nicely this one because it's kind of done creepily with puppets, and that's great. Generally worth a look. I'm hoping it's going to go in a direction I'm going to enjoy, but if not, it's still an entertaining journey to take. That's it for me for this week. I've reviewed everything I'm going to review. I'll be back on Tuesday with my new comic book video. Until then, look after each other, everyone. Stay safe. Bye.